The oak doors of Courtroom 4B swung open at exactly 9:00 a.m., and the gallery filled with an electric tension that made the air feel thick enough to touch. Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern woman with silver hair pulled into an immaculate bun, surveyed the packed room with sharp eyes that missed nothing. This was day 3 of the state versus Marcus Webb, and the media had dubbed it the Phantom Burglar Trial, a case that had captivated the entire Midwest. Marcus Webb sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting gray suit, his weathered hands folded on the polished wood surface. At 42, he looked older, his face etched with lines that spoke of hard living and harder choices. The prosecution had spent 2 days building their case against him. 17 home burglaries across 3 counties in Ohio, each executed with chilling precision. Families violated in the sanctity of their homes, heirlooms and security stolen in the dead of night. In the third row of the gallery, Detective Sarah Chen sat with uncommon stillness, her right hand resting gently on the head of her partner. Duke, a magnificent German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes, lay at her feet in perfect composure. His black and tan coat gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his ears swiveled occasionally, tracking every sound in the room. Duke wasn't just any police dog. He was a legend in the department, with a nose that had cracked 18 major cases in his 5-year career. The prosecution calls Detective Sarah Chen, announced Assistant District Attorney James Rothman, a tall man whose reputation for meticulous preparation preceded him. Sarah stood and Duke rose with her, their movements synchronized from years of partnership. As they walked to the witness stand, a ripple of interest moved through the jury. Duke positioned himself beside the stand, sitting at attention, his presence commanding respect without aggression. "Detective Chen," Rothman began, his voice carrying authority, "please tell the court about Duke's role in this investigation." Sarah's testimony was precise and compelling. She described how Duke had tracked Webb sent from the Martinez home, one of the earliest burglaries, following a trail that wound through backyards and alleys before ending at a gas station 3 blocks away. That trail, combined with security footage, had first put Webb on their radar. Duke had repeated similar tracking at 4 other crime scenes, each time leading them toward evidence that built an increasingly damning case. The defense attorney, Robert Caldwell, cross-examined with professional skepticism, questioning the reliability of scent evidence and suggesting contamination. But Sarah remained unshakable, citing Duke's training certifications, success rate, and the corroborating evidence found at each location Duke had led them to. As Sarah returned to her seat, she noticed something that made her pause. In the back row, partially hidden behind a woman in a blue blazer, sat a small child. The little girl couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 years old, wearing a pink dress with white flowers. Her enormous brown eyes tracked Sarah and Duke with an intensity that seemed wrong for such a young face, too knowing, too haunted. "Your Honor," Rothman continued, "the prosecution would like to call our next witness this afternoon. However, this witness requires special accommodations." Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "Emma Martinez, Your Honor. She's 3 years old and was present during the burglary at her foster home on March 15th. She's the only eyewitness who can place the defendant at that specific scene." The courtroom erupted. Journalists scribbled furiously. Jurors exchanged surprised glances. Robert Caldwell shot to his feet, his face flushing red. "Objection, Your Honor, this is outrageous. A 3-year-old child cannot be considered a competent witness. Their memory is unreliable, they're highly suggestible and—" "My chambers, both of you. Now." Judge Morrison's tone brooked no argument. As the attorneys disappeared through the door behind the bench, the courtroom buzzed with speculation. Sarah glanced back at the little girl, who was now holding the hand of a Hispanic woman in her 30s, likely a social worker. The child's eyes weren't on the departing attorneys or the curious crowd. They were fixed on Marcus Webb. And Webb was staring right back at her. It lasted only a moment, maybe 3 seconds, before Webb looked away, his expression carefully neutral. But Sarah had seen something flash across his face. Recognition, definitely, and something else. Fear, calculation. She couldn't quite place it, but her instincts, honed by 15 years in law enforcement, screamed that this was important. Duke whined softly beside her, an unusual break in his professional demeanor. Sarah looked down at her partner. The dog was alert, his ears forward, his gaze fixed in the same direction Sarah had been looking, toward Emma Martinez. "What is it, boy?" Sarah whispered, running her hand along Duke's neck. The German Shepherd's tail gave a single, uncertain wag. In 5 years of partnership, Sarah had learned to read Duke's body language like a book. Right now, he was confused about something, maybe even concerned. Dogs, especially highly trained ones like Duke, could sense human emotion with uncanny accuracy. Emma's fear must be palpable to him. 15 minutes passed before Judge Morrison returned, her expression unreadable. The attorneys followed, Rothman looking cautiously optimistic, Caldwell visibly frustrated. "The court will allow limited testimony from the minor witness," Morrison announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "However, there will be strict protocols. The child will be questioned only by Mr. Rothman, with no cross-examination unless I deem it absolutely necessary and appropriate. We'll take frequent breaks as needed. Is that understood?" Both attorneys nodded. "We'll recess for lunch. Court will reconvene at 2:00 p.m., at which time Emma Martinez will take the stand. I expect everyone in this courtroom to conduct themselves with the utmost sensitivity. This is a child, and I won't tolerate any behavior that traumatizes her further." Morrison's gaze swept the room, landing on each person with the weight of authority. "We're adjourned." The gavel struck, and people began filing out. Sarah remained seated, watching as the social worker guided Emma toward a side door. The little girl moved like someone much older, her steps careful, controlled. Just before disappearing through the doorway, Emma turned and looked directly at Duke. The expression on her face made Sarah's breath catch. It wasn't just fear. It was something more complex, a mixture of terror and confusion, and something else Sarah couldn't identify. Recognition, maybe, but how could a 3-year-old recognize a police dog she'd never met? Unless... Sarah's mind began working through possibilities, but they all seemed too far-fetched. She was reading too much into a traumatized child's reaction to a large dog. Plenty of kids were afraid of German Shepherds. It didn't mean anything. But as she left the courtroom with Duke at her side, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial. Something hiding in plain sight, waiting to be discovered. In the courthouse cafeteria, Sarah bought a sandwich she had no appetite for and found a quiet corner table. Duke lay at her feet and she pulled out the case file, reviewing details she'd memorized weeks ago. The Martinez burglary had occurred on March 15th, a Tuesday afternoon. Emma's foster grandmother, Rosa Martinez, had been watching the child while working from home. Rosa had fallen asleep on the couch around 2:00 p.m. When she woke at 3:30, she discovered the break-in, a smashed window in the back bedroom, jewelry and cash stolen from the master bedroom. Emma had been found hiding in her bedroom closet, unharmed but uncommunicative. It had taken hours before she'd spoken at all, and days before she'd told anyone she'd seen the bad man. Even then, her descriptions had been limited, fragmented. A tall man, dark clothes, scary face. Sarah flipped through the psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Rebecca Marsh, a child trauma specialist. Dr. Marsh's assessment concluded that Emma had indeed witnessed the burglary, that her memories appeared genuine rather than suggested or implanted, and that, surprisingly, her recall showed unusual clarity for a child her age. The doctor had noted Emma's intelligence and observational skills, suggesting the child might make a credible witness despite her age. But Dr. Marsh had also documented Emma's severe anxiety, her nightmares, and a new phobia of dogs that had emerged after the incident. That detail had seemed like a footnote at the time, plenty of trauma manifested in unexpected ways. Now, sitting in the cafeteria with her own police dog, Sarah wondered if that detail was more significant than anyone had realized. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rothman. "Can you bring Duke to the witness prep room at 1:30? Want Emma to see him in a controlled environment before testimony. Might help." Sarah texted back her agreement, though she had doubts about the strategy. If Emma was genuinely terrified of dogs, forcing her to confront Duke right before testifying could backfire spectacularly. At 1:30, Sarah and Duke made their way to the witness preparation room on the second floor. She knocked softly before entering. The room was designed to be child-friendly, with colorful furniture and toys scattered about. Emma sat on a small couch next to Lisa Rodriguez, the social worker. Ada Rothman stood near the window, and Dr. Marsh sat in a chair across from Emma, speaking to her in low, soothing tones. When Duke entered, the reaction was immediate. Emma's entire body went rigid. Her eyes locked onto the German Shepherd with laser focus. But she didn't cry out or hide. Instead, she gripped Lisa's hand and stared at Duke with that same complex expression Sarah had seen in the courtroom, fear mixed with something else. "It's okay, Emma," Dr. Marsh said gently. "This is Duke. He's Detective Chen's partner. He's a very good dog who helps catch bad people. He won't hurt you." Emma didn't respond, but her breathing had quickened. Sarah, reading the child's distress, gave Duke a hand signal to lie down. The German Shepherd dropped immediately into a sphinx position, making himself as non-threatening as possible. "See," Sarah said softly, sitting on the floor beside Duke. "He's very calm. He's trained to be gentle." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Emma did something unexpected. She slid off the couch and took 3 small steps toward Duke. Lisa started to rise, ready to intervene, but Dr. Marsh held up a hand, signaling her to wait. Emma moved closer, stopping about 5 feet from Duke. The dog remained perfectly still, only his eyes tracking the child's movement. Emma tilted her head, studying Duke with an intensity that seemed to penetrate beyond the surface. "Big dog," Emma whispered, "like." Everyone in the room leaned forward slightly. "Like what, sweetheart?" Lisa prompted gently. But Emma's face had closed down again, that brief moment of openness slamming shut. She shook her head and backed away, returning to Lisa's side. Rothman exchanged a glance with Dr. Marsh, who gave a small shrug. "It's progress," the psychologist said. She approached him voluntarily. "That's actually quite significant." A bailiff knocked on the door. "Court reconvenes in 20 minutes. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. In 20 minutes, a traumatized 3-year-old would take the stand in a packed courtroom, expected to confront the man who had violated her home and stolen her sense of safety. It seemed impossibly cruel, yet it was also the only path to justice. As they prepared to head back to the courtroom, Sarah caught Emma looking at Duke one more time. And this time, she definitely saw it, recognition flickering in those young eyes. The question was, recognition of what? At exactly 2:00 p.m., the bailiff's voice rang through the courthouse corridor. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison." The courtroom settled into an expectant hush as everyone took their seats. Sarah Chen could feel the tension radiating from every corner of the room, journalists poised with pens, jurors sitting straighter than usual, spectators craning their necks toward the witness entrance. Even the court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenograph machine with unusual stillness, as if afraid any sound might shatter the fragile moment about to unfold. The side door opened, and Lisa Rodriguez entered first, her hand extended behind her. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Emma Martinez appeared, her tiny figure barely visible behind the social worker's legs. The pink dress that had looked cheerful that morning now seemed almost defiant against the somber wood paneling and muted colors of the courtroom, a small splash of innocence in a place designed for harsh truths. Emma's eyes were red-rimmed from crying during lunch, though she'd finally stopped the tears. Her stuffed rabbit, a worn gray bunny with one ear permanently bent, was clutched so tightly against her chest that her knuckles had gone white. She moved with the mechanical steps of someone walking toward something terrifying but inevitable, like a child approaching a doctor's office for shots. Judge Morrison's expression, usually stern and unreadable, softened visibly. She leaned forward over her bench, her voice gentle in a way that surprised several of the veteran court watchers present. "Hello, Emma. My name is Judge Morrison, but you can call me Judge Patricia if that's easier. Do you know why you're here today?" Emma's gaze swept the courtroom with the hypervigilance of prey scanning for predators. Her eyes skipped over the jury box, moved past the clusters of strangers in the gallery, and locked onto Marcus Webb with the precision of a heat-seeking missile finding its target. Webb sat motionless at the defense table, but Sarah Chen, watching from her position 3 rows back, saw his jaw clench. His hands, which had been resting casually on the table, slowly curled into fists. For just a fraction of a second, so brief that Sarah wondered if she'd imagined it, something ugly flashed across his face. Then his expression smoothed into careful neutrality, but the damage was done. Sarah had seen it, and more importantly, so had Emma. The little girl's breath hitched audibly in the silent courtroom. Her stuffed rabbit fell from her fingers, hitting the carpet with a soft thump that seemed to echo like a gunshot. Emma's legs buckled slightly, and only Lisa's quick reflexes kept her from collapsing. "It's okay, sweetheart," Lisa whispered urgently, scooping up the rabbit and pressing it back into Emma's arms. "You're safe here. No one can hurt you, I promise." But Emma had begun to shake, small tremors that started in her hands and spread through her entire body like ripples across water. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, each breath a small gasp that tore at Sarah's heart. The detective had seen combat veterans with PTSD show less visible distress. Robert Caldwell, the defense attorney, leaned toward his client and whispered something. Webb nodded almost imperceptibly, but his eyes never left Emma. There was something predatory in his gaze, not threatening exactly, but calculating, assessing. Sarah's cop instincts screamed warnings she couldn't quite articulate. "Perhaps we should take a moment," Judge Morrison suggested, her concern evident. "Emma, would you like some water? We can wait until you're ready." Emma didn't respond. She just continued staring at Webb, her small body trembling, trapped in the grip of whatever memory his presence had triggered. Ada James Rothman approached with the careful, measured movements of someone approaching a spooked animal. He'd spent his lunch hour consulting with 3 different child psychologists, reviewing trauma-informed interviewing techniques, preparing questions designed to be as gentle as possible. But all the preparation in the world couldn't account for the reality of this terrified child standing before him. "Emma," he said softly, kneeling to bring himself to her eye level rather than towering above her, "my name is Mr. Rothman. I'm one of the good guys, okay? I help catch bad people and make sure they can't hurt anyone anymore. That's my job." Emma's eyes flickered toward him briefly, then back to Webb. She was tracking the defendant's every movement, every breath, with the intensity of someone watching a snake that might strike at any moment. "Can you tell everyone here your name?" Rothman asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Silence. The seconds stretched into a minute. Judge Morrison shifted in her seat. Jurors exchanged uncomfortable glances. In the gallery, a reporter's pen scratched against paper, the only sound in the suffocating quiet. "That's okay," Rothman continued, maintaining his gentle tone. "You don't have to say it if you don't want to. Can you tell me how old you are? Maybe show me with your fingers." Emma's hands remained locked around her rabbit. Her lips trembled, moving slightly as if trying to form words, but no sound emerged. Tears began to well in her eyes again, spilling over and tracking down her cheeks in silent streams. "Your Honor," Caldwell said, rising from his chair with obvious reluctance, "I hate to say this, but this is clearly too traumatic for the child." I moved to. Sit down, Mr. Caldwell, Morrison said sharply. We've barely begun. Lisa Rodriguez knelt beside Emma, her voice a soothing murmur in the child's ear. Sweetheart, you remember what we talked about how telling the truth helps catch bad people. You're being so brave right now. So brave. Emma turned to look at Lisa, and for a moment it seemed she might speak. Her mouth opened, and everyone in the courtroom leaned forward almost imperceptibly, straining to hear. But then her gaze drifted past Lisa, past Rothman, past the jury box, and landed on something in the back of the room. Duke. The German shepherd sat beside Sarah's chair in perfect professional composure, his black and tan coat gleaming under the courtroom lights. His ears were forward, alert, and his intelligent amber eyes were fixed on Emma with unusual intensity. When the child's gaze met his, Duke's tail gave a single, slow wag, a gesture so subtle that most people in the courtroom didn't notice it. But Emma noticed. The trembling that had racked her small body began to slow. The terror in her eyes didn't disappear, but it shifted, transforming into something else. Confusion, maybe, or recognition. Sarah couldn't tell, but the change was unmistakable. Emma, Rothman prompted gently, noticing her distraction. Can you look at me for a moment? The child's head turned slowly back to the prosecutor, but her eyes kept sliding toward Duke, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Her breathing, which had been quick and panicked, began to even out slightly. Let's try something different, Rothman said, pulling out a set of large photographs. I'm going to show you some pictures, and I want you to point if you see something you recognize. Can you do that for me? He held up the first photograph, a picture of the Martinez home, the yellow house with the red door where Emma lived with her foster family. Even from her seat, Sarah could see it was a pleasant-looking place, with flower boxes in the windows and a small bike in the front yard. Emma's small hand extended, her finger touching the photograph lightly. Good, Rothman encouraged. Is this your house, where you live with Grandma Rosa? Emma nodded, a tiny movement of her head. Excellent. Now, do you remember a day when someone came into your house who wasn't supposed to be there? Someone who scared you? The reaction was immediate and devastating. Emma's entire body went rigid again, her eyes going wide. The tears that had slowed now poured down her face in earnest, but she made no sound. It was the silence of her crying that was most disturbing, as if she'd learned through terrible experience that making noise was dangerous. It's okay, Rothman said quickly. You're safe now. Can you nod if you remember that day? Emma nodded, her movements jerky, mechanical. Did you see this person, the person who came into your house? Another nod. Was it during the daytime or nighttime? Emma held up fingers, one hand spread wide, the other with 3 fingers extended. 8 fingers total. She was trying to show a time, Sarah realized. The burglary report had stated Rosa Martinez had fallen asleep around 2:00 p.m. and woken at 3:30. Emma was indicating afternoon. In the afternoon, Rothman clarified, when the sun was still out. Nod. Where was Grandma Rosa? Emma pointed to the couch in the photograph, then closed her eyes and tilted her head to the side, mimicking sleep. Grandma was sleeping on the couch, Rothman translated for the record. And where were you, Emma? Where were you when the person came in? Emma's breathing quickened again. She pointed to a different area of the photograph, the back of the house, where the bedrooms would be. You were in your room. Nod. And you saw the person who came in. Emma's response was barely perceptible, the smallest movement of her head, but it was affirmative. Can you tell us what this person looked like? Silence stretched. Emma's mouth opened and closed several times like a fish gasping for air. Her eyes darted around the courtroom, to Webb, to Lisa, to Judge Morrison, and finally back to Duke. The dog was still watching her with that intense, focused attention that seemed to communicate something beyond human understanding. Tall, Emma whispered suddenly, her voice so soft that several jurors cupped their ears to hear better. Dark. The person was tall and wore dark clothes, Rothman asked, his voice carefully controlled to hide his excitement at getting actual words from the child. Scary face, Emma added, her voice cracking on the last word. A scary face, Rothman repeated. Emma, this is very important. Is that person here in this room right now? Emma's gaze moved inexorably toward Marcus Webb. She stared at him for a long moment, and Webb stared back. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension, predator and prey locked in a silent confrontation that made everyone in the courtroom hold their breath. Then Emma looked away, her eyes returning to Duke, and she didn't answer the question. Rothman tried several more times, approaching it from different angles, but Emma had retreated into silence again. She would nod or shake her head to simple questions. Yes, she was scared. Yes, she hid in her closet. Yes, the person took things from Grandma's room. But she wouldn't speak again, and she wouldn't identify Webb directly. After 45 minutes of painstaking questioning, Rothman had established that Emma had witnessed the burglary, that she'd seen the perpetrator, and that she was terrified. But without a direct identification, the testimony was less powerful than the prosecution needed. Judge Morrison called for a 15-minute recess, noting Emma's obvious exhaustion. As Lisa prepared to guide the child out, Emma pulled away from her and walked, slowly but deliberately, toward the back of the courtroom. Toward Duke. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the 3-year-old approached the German Shepherd. Sarah tensed, ready to intervene if necessary, but Duke remained perfectly still, his training overriding any instinct to react to the approaching child. Emma stopped 3 feet away from the dog. She studied him with that same intense focus that had marked all her interactions with Duke, fear mixed with confusion mixed with something else Sarah still couldn't identify. "Big dog," Emma whispered, her voice carrying in the silent courtroom. Duke's tail wagged once, twice. His ears rotated forward and he made a soft sound, not quite a whine, more like a gentle vocalization of acknowledgement. Emma took one more step closer, then another. Now she was within touching distance, her small hand extending tentatively toward Duke's head. "Emma, sweetheart," Lisa called nervously, "maybe we should." But Emma wasn't listening. Her hand made contact with Duke's fur, touching the top of his head with feather-light pressure. Duke didn't move, didn't react, just sat with perfect stillness while this traumatized child confronted whatever fear had been haunting her. And then Emma spoke, her voice clear in the hushed courtroom. "Not you, different." Sarah's breath caught. Different from what, Emma? But the moment was broken. Emma pulled her hand back and ran to Lisa, burying her face against the social worker's leg. Lisa scooped her up and carried her quickly out of the courtroom, murmuring soothing words. Sarah looked down at Duke, her mind racing. "Different," Emma had said. "Different from what?" "Different from another dog." The implication hit Sarah like a physical blow. She pulled out her phone and began typing frantically, pulling up the case file, searching for something she might have missed. The burglary reports, the evidence logs, the witness statements. She'd reviewed them all dozens of times, but now she was looking for something specific. Something about a dog. As the recess stretched on and the courtroom remained in confused silence, Sarah Chen felt the first stirrings of a revelation that would change everything. Emma wasn't just afraid of dogs in general. She was afraid because she'd seen a specific dog, a dog connected to the burglary, connected to Marcus Webb. A dog that no one had known to look for. Until now, the conference room had become a war zone of scattered papers, coffee cups, and the electric tension of detectives chasing a lead that had materialized out of nowhere. Sarah Chen stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, her mind racing faster than she could write. Duke lay in the corner, his head on his paws, but his eyes tracked every movement in the room with alert intelligence. "Run it by me again," said Lieutenant Marcus Dawson, a barrel-chested man with 30 years on the force and skepticism etched into every line of his weathered face. He sat with his arms crossed, watching Sarah with the expression of someone waiting to be convinced. Emma said not you different when she touched Duke, Sarah explained, circling the words she'd written on the board. She's been terrified of dogs since the burglary. That's documented in Dr. Marsh's psychological evaluation. But it's not a general fear of all dogs. It's specific. She recognized something about Duke, but knew he wasn't the right dog. "You're saying Webb had a dog with him during the burglary?" asked Detective Ramon Torres, Sarah's colleague and friend. He leaned forward, his dark eyes sharp with interest. "That's a hell of a leap from a 3-year-old touching a German shepherd and saying 2 words." "Is it?" Sarah turned to face the room. "Think about it. Emma hid in her closet during the break-in. We know that from her testimony. She saw Webb's face, but she's too traumatized to identify him directly in court. But what if she saw something else? What if Webb had a dog with him, and that's what's been haunting her nightmares?" Ada James Rothman, who joined them immediately after court adjourned, rubbed his temples. "It would explain the specific dog phobia. Kids that age don't usually develop targeted fears without a trigger. But Sarah, we've been over Webb's apartment, his truck, his workplace. There was no evidence of a dog, no food, no toys, no hair." "Maybe he got rid of it," Sarah countered, "after he realized it could link him to the crimes. Or maybe he kept it somewhere else. Do we have records on pet ownership?" Torres was already on his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Checking his rental agreement, vet records, licensing databases." He paused, squinting at the screen. "Wait, got something. Marcus Webb registered a dog with the county 2 years ago. Labrador Retriever, brown male, name Bruno. But there's no current record. No renewals, no vet visits in the past 8 months." The room went silent. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What happened 8 months ago? 2 months after the Martinez burglary, Rothman said quietly, checking his case timeline. 2 months after Emma saw whoever broke into her house. Lieutenant Dawson uncrossed his arms, sitting forward. Could be coincidence. Dogs die, run away, get rehomed all the time. Or Webb got rid of evidence, Sarah said. She turned back to the whiteboard and began writing rapidly. Think about his M.O. Webb hit 17 houses across 3 counties. He was careful, methodical, never left obvious evidence. But what if he had an accomplice, a dog that made him look innocent? Torres caught on immediately. A guy walking a friendly lab through a neighborhood doesn't raise suspicions. People see him. They think nice man walking his dog, not burglar casing houses. Exactly, Sarah said, her excitement building. And if the dog was with him during some of the burglaries, it would explain things that never made sense. Remember the Henderson break-in. The family had a Rottweiler that should have gone ballistic, but the neighbors reported it was quiet that whole afternoon. What if Webb's dog kept it distracted? Rothman was nodding slowly. Or the Johnson house had that motion sensor alarm system that didn't trigger even though someone clearly ransacked the place. The system was designed to ignore pets under 50 pounds, but the adjusters found it had been triggered multiple times by something heavier. We thought it was a malfunction. What if it was Webb's dog moving through the house? Sarah finished. She grabbed a file from the table, flipping through crime scene photos. We need to go back through every single scene. Look for evidence we dismissed or overlooked. Dog hair, paw prints, anything. Torres was already on the phone, calling the forensics lab. "Yeah, it's Torres. I need you to pull all evidence from the Webb burglary cases, specifically looking for any animal traces. Dog hair, saliva, anything canine. I don't care if you logged it as contamination, I need it all." "Yes, I'll hold." Sarah turned to Duke, an idea forming. "Lieutenant, what if we take Duke back to some of the crime scenes? If Webb's dog was there, Duke might be able to pick up a scent trail, even after all this time." Dawson considered this, then shook his head. "Too much time has passed. Most of those houses have been cleaned, repainted, some have new owners. The scent would be long gone. Not everywhere, Sarah argued. The Martinez house, Emma's foster family still lives there. They haven't changed anything major because they can't afford it. If Webb's dog was in that house 7 months ago, there might still be traces. Rothman checked his watch. It's 4:30 now. How fast can you get there? 30 minutes if traffic cooperates. Do it, Dawson ordered. Tours, you go with her. I want everything documented, photos, videos, proper chain of custody on any evidence. And Sarah, he fixed her with a stern look. I don't want you getting Emma's hopes up or re-traumatizing that family. You find something concrete, then we'll talk about next steps. 25 minutes later, Sarah and Tours pulled up outside the Martinez home. The yellow house with the red door looked exactly like it had in the courtroom photographs, cheerful and well-maintained despite being in a modest neighborhood where most residents were working-class families trying to get by. Rosa Martinez answered the door, a stout woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and kind eyes that showed the strain of the past months. Detective Chen, is everything all right? Is Emma? Emma's fine, Mrs. Martinez, Sarah assured her quickly. She did wonderfully in court today. She's very brave, but we need to ask your permission to bring Duke through your house. We're looking for some additional evidence that might help the case. Rosa's expression shifted from concern to confusion. Evidence, but you already searched months ago. What could be left? Tours stepped forward with his characteristic charm. Mrs. Martinez, we're following up on a new lead. It won't take long and we'll be very respectful of your home. May we come in? Rosa hesitated, then stepped aside. Of course, anything to help catch that man. Emma still has nightmares, you know. Some nights she wakes up screaming. The interior of the house was exactly as Sarah remembered from the initial investigation. A comfortable living room with worn but clean furniture, family photos covering every available surface, the smell of something savory cooking in the kitchen. Rosa led them through the space, pointing out where she'd been sleeping on the couch the day of the burglary. Emma's room is down the hall, second door on the right, Rosa said. That's where she was hiding when it happened. I'll never forgive myself for falling asleep that day. It wasn't your fault, Mrs. Martinez, Tours said gently. The only person responsible is the man who broke in. Sarah gave Duke the command to search, and the German Shepherd immediately went to work. He moved through the living room systematically, nose to the ground, checking corners and furniture with professional thoroughness. Sarah had seen Duke work hundreds of scenes, and she'd learned to read his body language like a book. Right now, he was focused but not alerting, nothing of interest yet. They moved down the hallway toward the bedrooms. Rosa pointed out where the perpetrator had entered through a window in the master bedroom. We had to replace the whole window frame. Cost us $800 we didn't have. Duke entered Emma's room, a small space decorated with cartoon characters and stuffed animals. A tiny bed with a princess comforter sat against one wall, and a closet with sliding doors occupied the opposite wall. Sarah's heart clenched, imagining a terrified 3-year-old hiding in that closet while a stranger ransacked her home. Duke's demeanor changed the moment he entered. His tail went rigid, his ears perked forward, and his nose worked overtime, sweeping back and forth across the carpet. He moved toward the closet, then paused, circling back to the doorway. He repeated this pattern 3 times before sitting suddenly and looking up at Sarah, the signal for a positive alert. He's got something, Sarah said, her pulse quickening. Tours, start documenting. Tours pulled out his phone and began taking video as Sarah examined the areas Duke had focused on. The carpet near the closet showed old staining, likely from the fingerprint powder and other forensic work done months ago. But Duke was alerting to something specific. Sarah pulled out an evidence kit and began taking samples, carpet fibers, dust from the baseboards, anything that might contain DNA or other trace evidence. Duke moved to the closet itself, nosing at the sliding door until Sarah opened it. Inside, Emma's small clothes hung neatly and shoes were lined up on the floor. Duke pushed past them, focusing on the back corner where Emma would have hidden. He sniffed intensely, then looked up at Sarah again with another alert. "What is it, boy?" Sarah murmured, examining the corner with her flashlight. At first she saw nothing unusual. Then she noticed it caught on a rough edge of the baseboard, so small she almost missed it, several strands of hair. Not human hair, animal hair. Brown, medium length with the texture of a Labrador's coat. "Tors, are you getting this?" Sarah's hands were steady as she carefully collected the hair samples, but inside she was screaming with excitement. "I need evidence, bags, labels, the works, and call the lab, tell them this is priority 1. Rosa appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "What did you find?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "Potential evidence, Mrs. Martinez. We'll need to run tests to confirm, but this could be very helpful to the case." "But what is it?" "Hair." Rosa stepped closer, squinting. "That looks like dog hair, but we don't have a dog, never have." "Exactly," Sarah said quietly. Duke continued his search, moving through the master bedroom where jewelry and cash had been stolen. He alerted twice more, once near the dresser where Rosa's jewelry box had been, and once near the window the perpetrator had used to enter. At each location, Sarah found more trace evidence. Small tufts of brown hair, a partial paw print on the dusty windowsill that had been photographed but not collected in the original investigation, even what appeared to be dried saliva on the corner of the dresser. Tors was filming everything, maintaining the chain of evidence with meticulous care. "This is incredible," he muttered. "How did we miss all this the first time?" "We weren't looking for it," Sarah said. "We had no reason to think a dog was involved. These samples were probably written off as contamination, neighbors' pets, animals passing through the yard, whatever. But Duke is telling us they're significant." After 90 minutes of thorough searching, they had collected 17 separate samples of potential evidence. Sarah's evidence kit was full, and her documentation was flawless. If this went to trial, when this went to trial, every sample would be defensible in court. As they prepared to leave, Rosa walked them to the door. "Will this help Emma? Will it help put that man away?" Sarah met the older woman's eyes. "Mrs. Martinez, I can't make promises about the outcome of the trial, but what I can tell you is that Emma gave us the key to finding this evidence. Without her, we would never have known to look. Your granddaughter is incredibly brave and incredibly smart." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. She's been through so much, too much for such a little girl. "I know," Sarah said softly, "but she's helping us make sure he can't hurt anyone else. That takes courage most adults don't have." Back in the car, Tors drove while Sarah called Lieutenant Dawson. "Sir, we've got it. Multiple samples of dog hair, paw prints, possible saliva, all from locations Webb would have accessed during the burglary. Duke alerted positive at every major point of entry and theft." "How fast can the lab run DNA?" Dawson's voice was sharp with interest. "They're standing by. I'm heading there now. If we can match this DNA to Webb's registered dog, and if we can find that dog or prove Webb disposed of it after the burglary." "Then we've got him cold," Dawson finished. "Good work, Chen, both of you. Keep me posted." Sarah ended the call and looked down at Duke, who was lying contentedly in the back seat, his job well done. "You're a genius, you know that." Duke's tail thumped against the seat. "Now we just need to find Bruno," Tors said. "One missing Labrador retriever last seen 8 months ago. Any ideas?" Sarah was already pulling up animal control records on her phone. Webb wouldn't have just released the dog in his neighborhood. Too much chance of it being traced back to him. He'd have taken it somewhere remote. Let's check rural areas within 50 miles, see if any brown labs were picked up as strays around the time Bruno disappeared. As Tors drove through the evening traffic toward the forensics lab, Sarah felt the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. A 3-year-old had touched a police dog and said 2 words: Not you, different. And those words had unlocked the key to the entire case. Sometimes justice spoke in the smallest voices, and sometimes those voices changed everything. The forensics lab hummed with activity even at 7:00 p.m., fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across stainless steel tables and sophisticated equipment. Dr. Patricia Lynn, the head forensic analyst, met Sarah and Tors at the entrance, her white lab coat crisp despite the long day. She was a petite woman in her 40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a reputation for being meticulous to the point of obsession. "Detective Chen, I got your message," Dr. Lin said, her Mandarin accent still present after 20 years in the States. "Show me what you have." Sarah carefully transferred the evidence bags to the examination table, laying them out in order of collection. 17 samples total: hair, possible saliva, one partial paw print, all collected from the Martinez residence, locations correlating with the perpetrator's movements during the March 15th burglary. Dr. Lin pulled on latex gloves and began examining the first bag, holding it up to the light. Brown dog hair, medium length, consistent with Labrador or similar breed. You think the suspect brought a dog to the crime scene. "We know he owned a brown lab named Bruno," Tors added, pulling up the registration records on his phone. "Registered 2 years ago, but no records after last March, 2 months after this burglary." "Convenient timing," Dr. Lin murmured, her tweezers carefully extracting a single hair from the evidence bag. She placed it under a comparison microscope, adjusting the focus with practiced precision. "Hair morphology is definitely canine. Medium-grade medulla, color consistent with chocolate or dark yellow Labrador. I can run mitochondrial DNA, but that'll take 48 hours minimum." Sarah's shoulders sagged slightly. "We don't have 48 hours. The trial resumes Monday morning. Is there anything faster?" Dr. Lin looked up from the microscope, one eyebrow raised. "You want fast or you want accurate?" "Both," Sarah said firmly. "This could be the key to the entire case. A 3-year-old child has been too traumatized to identify her attacker in court, but she told us about a dog. If we can prove Webb brought his dog to that house." "Then you have him," Dr. Lin finished. She considered for a moment, then nodded decisively. "I'll run preliminary DNA tonight, prioritize these samples. If there's enough genetic material, I might have something by tomorrow afternoon. But Sarah, even if I confirm these samples came from the same dog, you still need to prove that dog belonged to Webb." "Working on it," Tors said, his phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah, hi, this is Detective Ramon Tors with the Metro Police. I need to speak with someone about stray dog pickups from last March." "Yes, I'll hold." Dr. Lin returned to her examination, methodically working through each evidence bag. Sarah watched in fascination as the scientist's practiced hands extracted, cataloged, and analyzed each sample. After 30 minutes, Dr. Lin straightened, pulling off her gloves. "Preliminary assessment. All hair samples appear to come from the same animal. Consistent color, diameter, and morphology. The saliva sample on the dresser is degraded but viable. I should be able to extract DNA. The paw print." She pulled up a digital image on her computer screen. 4 toe pads, 1 metacarpal pad, no claw marks visible. Size and spacing consistent with a medium to large dog, probably 50 to 70 pounds. Matches the Labrador theory. How did the original investigation miss all this? Sarah wondered aloud. "Because they weren't looking for it," Dr. Lin replied matter-of-factly. "When you process a crime scene, you look for human evidence first: fingerprints, DNA, fibers from clothing. Animal traces are usually logged as environmental contamination, especially in residential areas where pets are common. Your original team probably noted these samples and dismissed them as belonging to neighborhood animals." Tors ended his call, his expression animated. "Got something. Animal Control picked up a brown lab in rural Millbrook County on March 28th, 13 days after the Martinez burglary. Male, no collar, no microchip, approximately 4 years old. He was in bad shape, dehydrated, malnourished, like he'd been abandoned and wandering for days. Sarah's heart rate kicked up. Where is he now? That's the good news and bad news. Good news. He was adopted out to a family in Riverside after a mandatory hold period. Bad news. They named him Charlie, and they have no idea about his previous history. We need to see that dog, Sarah said immediately. Tonight, if it's Bruno, if we can prove the connection. I'm already on it, Tors interrupted, typing rapidly on his phone. The adoption records listed Jennifer and Mark Paulson, 2 kids, address in Riverside. That's about 40 minutes from here. Dr. Lin held up a hand. Before you go charging off, understand what you need. Even if this family's dog is Webb's former dog, that doesn't automatically prove Webb brought him to the burglary. You need a clear chain of evidence. The dog's DNA matches the samples from the Martinez house. Webb's ownership records prove he had access to the dog at the time of the burglary, and you need to explain why he got rid of the dog shortly after. Unless the dog can identify Webb, which he can't, you're building a circumstantial case, Dr. Lin continued. Strong circumstantial evidence, but circumstantial nonetheless. A good defense attorney will argue the dog could have been at the Martinez house for innocent reasons. Maybe Webb did yard work there previously. Maybe the dog wandered through the neighborhood. You need to close every loophole. Sarah absorbed this, her mind working through the legal implications. Dr. Lin was right. They needed an airtight case. What if Emma can identify the dog? She saw him during the burglary. If we show her photos and she picks out Bruno, then you have your eyewitness, Tors finished, catching on. Not identifying Webb directly, which traumatizes her, but identifying his dog, which she already told us about. Dr. Lin nodded approvingly. Smart. A child identifying an animal is more reliable than identifying a human anyway. Kids are exceptionally good at remembering animals. If Emma saw this dog during a traumatic event, she'll remember it. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Ada Rothman. He answered on the second ring, sounding exhausted. Chen, please tell me you have good news. We have dog hair, saliva, and paw prints from the Martinez house. Dr. Lin is running DNA, and we might have found Bruno, Webb's missing lab. He was picked up as a stray in Millbrook County 2 weeks after the burglary. There was a pause, then Rothman's voice came back sharp and focused. You're sure about this? As sure as I can be without DNA confirmation. But Jim, we need Emma to identify the dog. If she can pick Bruno out of a photo lineup. Do it, Rothman said immediately. But carefully. I don't want defense claiming we coached her or showed her leading images. Use proper photo array procedures, multiple dogs of similar breed and color, document everything. And Sarah, make sure Dr. Marsh is present. The child's welfare comes first. Understood. Sarah ended the call and looked at Tors. Let's go meet the Paulsons. 45 minutes later, they pulled up outside a modest 2-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Swing sets dotted several yards, and the street had that settled, family-friendly feeling of a place where people actually knew their neighbors. The Paulson house had a neat lawn and a basketball hoop in the driveway. Tors rang the doorbell, and after a moment, it opened to reveal a woman in her 30s with blonde hair pulled into a messy bun and paint stains on her jeans. Yes. Mrs. Jennifer Paulson. Sarah showed her badge. I'm Detective Chen. This is Detective Tors. We're sorry to disturb you so late, but we need to ask you some questions about the dog you adopted from animal control last spring. Jennifer's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Charlie, what about him? He's not stolen or something, is he? Because the shelter assured us all the legal holds had been satisfied. No, ma'am, nothing like that, Tors assured her quickly. We're investigating a criminal case, and we believe your dog might have information relevant to that case. Information? He's a dog. Jennifer looked between them as if they'd lost their minds. "May we see him?" Sarah asked. "It'll just take a moment." Jennifer hesitated, then stepped back. "Sure, I guess. He's in the backyard with my husband and kids. Follow me." She led them through a comfortable home filled with the cheerful chaos of family life. Kids' shoes by the door, artwork on the refrigerator, the lingering smell of dinner. Through the kitchen window, Sarah could see a man throwing a tennis ball for a brown Labrador while two children, maybe 6 and 8 years old, shrieked with laughter. The moment Sarah laid eyes on the dog, she knew. The brown coat, the build, the distinctive white patch on his chest that she'd seen in Webb's registration photos. This was Bruno. "How long have you had him?" Sarah asked, pulling out her phone to take photos. "Since April. He was in rough shape when we got him, skinny, nervous, had some scars on his legs like he'd been running through brush. But he's been wonderful with the kids. Gentle, patient, smart as a whip." Tors was filming now, documenting the dog's appearance and behavior. The lab bounded over to the fence, tail wagging, clearly friendly and well-adjusted despite whatever trauma he'd experienced. "Mrs. Paulson, we need to ask you to bring Charlie, the dog, to the police station tomorrow for a formal identification. We'll also need to take a DNA sample, just a cheek swab. It's non-invasive and won't hurt him." Jennifer's concern deepened. "What's this about? What did his previous owner do?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "We're investigating a series of burglaries. We believe the dog was present at some of the crime scenes. He's not in any trouble and neither are you. But he's a witness, in a sense, and we need to document that." "A witness," Jennifer repeated slowly. "My dog is a witness to burglaries." "I know it sounds strange," Tors said with a disarming smile. "But this could be crucial to putting a dangerous criminal behind bars. You'd be helping ensure justice for multiple families, including one with a 3-year-old girl who was traumatized by what happened." The mention of a child seemed to decide Jennifer. "Okay, what time tomorrow?" 10 a.m. Ask for Detective Chen at the front desk. And Mrs. Paulson, Sarah met her eyes, please don't discuss this with anyone. If the suspect finds out we've located the dog, he might try to intimidate you or interfere with the evidence. Jennifer paled slightly but nodded. "We'll be there." As they drove back toward the city, Tors glanced at Sarah. "Think Emma will recognize him?" "I think that little girl has had that dog's face burned into her memory for 7 months," Sarah replied. "The question is whether she'll be able to tell us when we show her the photos." Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Lin. "Working through the night. Preliminary DNA looking promising. Should have results by noon tomorrow." Sarah leaned back in her seat, feeling the exhaustion of the long day settling into her bones. Duke, sensing her mood, leaned forward from the back seat and nuzzled her shoulder, his way of offering comfort and solidarity. "Almost there, boy," she murmured, scratching behind his ears. "One more piece of the puzzle and we've got him." Tors navigated through the late evening traffic, the city lights blurring past the windows. "You know what's crazy? A 3-year-old kid broke this case wide open. All our forensics, all our investigation, all the hours we put in, and it took Emma Martinez touching your dog and saying 2 words to point us in the right direction." Sarah smiled tiredly. "Sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths. We just have to be smart enough to listen." Tomorrow, they would show Emma the photos. Tomorrow, Dr. Lin would confirm the DNA match. Tomorrow, the case against Marcus Webb would transform from strong to absolutely devastating. But tonight, Sarah allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. Justice was coming, and it was coming on 4 paws with a wagging tail and a brown coat. Sometimes the truth really did come from the most unexpected places. Saturday morning broke gray and cold, with rain drumming against the windows of the police station's victim services wing. Sarah Chen arrived at 8:30 a.m., 2 hours before the scheduled meeting with Emma Martinez, carrying a folder thick with carefully prepared photo arrays and documentation. Duke padded beside her, his coat still damp from the short walk from the parking lot. Dr. Rebecca Marsh was already waiting in the soft interview room, a space designed specifically for child witnesses, with comfortable furniture in gentle colors, toys in bins along the walls, and lighting that mimicked natural sunlight rather than harsh fluorescence. The psychologist looked up from her tablet, offering Sarah a tired smile. "Long night?" Sarah asked. "Reviewing protocols for child identification procedures," Dr. Marsh replied, gesturing to the stack of journals and printouts beside her. "I want to make absolutely certain we do this correctly. Emma's already been through so much trauma. If we mishandle this, we could damage her further, and any identification would be worthless in court." "Walk me through it," Sarah said, settling into one of the chairs. Duke lay at her feet, his presence calming even in the tense atmosphere. Dr. Marsh pulled up a presentation on her tablet. "Child witnesses are highly suggestible, especially trauma victims. We cannot, under any circumstances, lead Emma to a particular answer. The photo array must contain at least 6 images of similar-looking dogs, brown Labradors of approximately the same age and appearance. The photos should be presented simultaneously, not sequentially, to avoid any implication that one is more correct than others." She swiped to the next slide. "Emma must be told that the dog she saw might not be in the photos, that it's okay to say she doesn't see him. We emphasize that 'I don't know' is a perfectly acceptable answer. And crucially, Sarah, you cannot react to her choice. No smiling, no encouragement, no disappointment. Completely neutral." Sarah nodded, pulling out her own folder. "I've prepared an array of 8 photos. All brown labs, all males, all between 3 and 5 years old based on appearance. Bruno, the dog we think is Webb's, is in position 5. The photos are all similar quality, similar angles, outdoor settings." Dr. Marsh examined each photo critically, comparing backgrounds, lighting, and the dog's expressions. After several minutes, she nodded approval. "This is good work. The dogs are sufficiently similar that Emma would need genuine recognition to pick one out, not just a guess based on appearance." The door opened, and Lisa Rodriguez entered with Emma. The little girl looked smaller than ever in an oversized purple sweater and jeans, her hair in 2 neat braids. She was clutching the same worn rabbit from court, but her eyes, those enormous brown eyes, were alert and curious rather than terrified. "Good morning, Emma," Dr. Marsh said warmly, kneeling to the child's level. "Do you remember me, Dr. Marsh? We've talked a few times." Emma nodded, her gaze sliding past the psychologist to where Duke lay. The German shepherd's tail thumped once against the floor in greeting. "And you remember Detective Chen and Duke," Dr. Marsh continued. "They're here because they need your help with something. Is that okay?" Another small nod. Lisa guided Emma to a child-sized table with comfortable chairs, and the little girl settled in with her rabbit in her lap. Sarah noticed Emma's fingers were in constant motion, fidgeting with the toy's bent ear, a self-soothing behavior that spoke to her underlying anxiety despite her calmer appearance. "Emma," Dr. Marsh began, sitting across from the child, "Detective Chen is going to show you some pictures of dogs. We want to know if any of these dogs look familiar to you. But here's the really important part. The dog you saw might not be in these pictures. If you don't see him, that's okay. You can tell us 'I don't see him' or 'I don't know,' and that's a perfect answer. Do you understand?" "Yes," Emma whispered. "There's no right or wrong answer," Dr. Marsh emphasized. "We just want to know what you remember. Can you tell me what you're going to do if you don't see the dog in the pictures?" Emma's voice was soft but clear. "Say I don't see him." "Perfect. Are you ready?" Emma nodded, her grip on the rabbit tightening slightly. Sarah placed the photo array on the table, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. 8 photos, arranged in 2 rows of 4. 8 brown Labradors, all looking friendly and approachable, all so similar that even Sarah had to focus to remember which one was Bruno. Emma leaned forward, her small face serious with concentration. She studied each photo carefully, methodically, starting from the top left and working her way across. Her finger hovered over each image but didn't touch, as if she was afraid that touching might make the memories more real. The room was silent except for the rain against the windows and Duke's soft breathing. Sarah maintained a neutral expression, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Dr. Marsh sat perfectly still, observing. Lisa stood near the door, her hands clasped tightly together. Emma reached the end of the first row and moved to the second. Her finger paused over position 5, Bruno's photo, and Sarah saw the child's breathing change, becoming faster, shallower. Emma's eyes widened slightly, and her free hand clutched the rabbit so tightly that her knuckles went white. But she didn't say anything. She continued to the end of the array, examining the last 3 photos with the same careful attention. Then she went back to the beginning and started over. "Take your time, sweetheart," Dr. Marsh said gently. "There's no rush." Emma completed her second review and sat back in her chair. Her eyes were fixed on one photo, position 5. Her lips trembled, and for a terrible moment, Sarah thought the child might shut down completely, retreating into the traumatized silence they'd witnessed in court. Then Emma lifted one small finger and pointed directly at Bruno's photo. "Him," she whispered, "that's the dog." Dr. Marsh's expression remained professionally neutral, though Sarah saw the slight tension in her shoulders ease. "You're sure? This dog looks familiar to you." Emma nodded, her finger still pointing. "He was there in my house with the bad man." "Can you tell me what you remember about this dog?" Dr. Marsh asked, her voice carefully neutral, not leading. Emma's gaze never left the photo. "He was big, brown. He had a white spot right here." She touched her own chest, indicating where Bruno's distinctive white chest patch would be. "He came in my room while I was hiding." Sarah felt her breath catch. This was new information. Emma had never mentioned the dog entering her room before. "The dog came into your room," Dr. Marsh prompted gently. "When I was in the closet," Emma said, her voice growing stronger as the memory crystallized. "I heard him sniffing. His nose came under the door." She demonstrated with her hand, showing how the dog's snout had appeared in the crack beneath the closet door. "I was so scared. I thought he would bark and the bad man would find me." "But he didn't bark?" Dr. Marsh asked. Emma shook her head. "He just sniffed and walked away. Then I heard the bad man calling him, said, 'Bruno, come.'" She looked up at Dr. Marsh with those enormous haunted eyes. "That's the dog's name, Bruno." The room went absolutely silent. Sarah's professional composure nearly cracked. Emma hadn't just identified the dog from a photo, she'd provided the name. A name that had never been mentioned in her presence, that wasn't in any report Emma could have accessed, that only someone who'd actually heard Marcus Webb call the dog would know. Dr. Marsh maintained her neutral expression, though Sarah could see the slight widening of her eyes. "You heard someone call the dog Bruno?" "Yes," Emma said with certainty. "When he was taking Grandma's jewelry box, he said, 'Bruno, leave it, and Bruno, come.' I heard it from the closet." Lisa had tears streaming down her face, one hand pressed to her mouth. Sarah carefully documented Emma's statements on her recording device, her hands rock-steady despite the earthquake of emotion inside her chest. "Emma, you've been so brave," Dr. Marsh said softly. "Is there anything else you remember about that day, about the dog or the person who was with him?" Emma considered this, her finger still resting on Bruno's photo. "The dog was nice. He didn't hurt me, but I was scared because he was with the bad man. And after," she paused, struggling with the words, "after they left, I couldn't stop thinking about the dog. I had bad dreams about big brown dogs coming to find me." "Is that why you've been scared of dogs?" Dr. Marsh asked gently. Emma nodded. "But Duke is different." She looked over at the German shepherd who was watching her with calm, intelligent eyes. "Duke is a good dog. He catches bad people. He's not like Bruno." As if understanding he was being discussed, Duke rose and walked slowly over to Emma's table. He moved with careful deliberation, giving the child every opportunity to retreat if she wanted. But Emma didn't pull away. Instead, she reached out one tentative hand and placed it on Duke's head, just as she had in the courtroom. "Duke would never help a bad person," Emma said with conviction. "He only helps good people, right?" "That's exactly right," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't quite suppress. "Duke is a police dog. His job is to help catch people who do bad things and keep people safe." Emma continued petting Duke, and the tension that had been holding her small body rigid began to ease. "I like Duke," she announced. "Can I give him a hug?" Dr. Marsh looked at Sarah, who nodded. "Duke would love that. He's very gentle." Emma slid off her chair and wrapped her small arms around Duke's neck. The German shepherd stood perfectly still, his tail wagging slowly, accepting the child's embrace with the patience and gentleness that had made him such an exceptional police dog. Sarah watched this moment, a traumatized 3-year-old finding comfort in the very type of animal that had haunted her nightmares, and felt something tight in her chest finally loosen. This was why she did this job, not for the arrests or the commendations or even the satisfaction of closing cases. For moments like this, when justice and healing intersected, when the truth finally came to light and a child could begin to reclaim her sense of safety. After several minutes, Emma released Duke and returned to her chair. She looked at the photo array again, then up at Dr. Marsh. "Did I help? Will the bad man have to go away now?" "You helped very much," Dr. Marsh assured her. "You were so brave to tell us about Bruno. That's very important information." Lisa came forward and knelt beside Emma's chair. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart, so proud." Emma smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her solemn little face into something bright and childlike. It was the first time Sarah had seen her smile, and it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. "Can I go play now?" Emma asked. "Of course," Dr. Marsh said. "You've done a very hard job today. You deserve to go have some fun." As Lisa led Emma toward the play area in the corner of the room, Sarah carefully packed up the photo array and her recording equipment. Dr. Marsh waited until Emma was out of earshot before speaking. "That was remarkable," the psychologist said quietly. "Not just the identification, but providing the dog's name unprompted. That level of specific detail from a 3-year-old is extraordinary and extremely credible. No defense attorney in the world could convince a jury that was coached or suggested." "She heard Webb call the dog by name during the burglary," Sarah said, still processing the implications. "Which means Webb didn't just bring Bruno to case the neighborhood. He brought him inside the house during the actual break-in. That's premeditation, sophistication. It shows this wasn't opportunistic crime. It was calculated." Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Lin. "DNA results confirmed. All samples from Martinez's house match. Come to lab ASAP." Sarah showed the message to Dr. Marsh. "We have our proof. Dog hair and saliva from the crime scene match Bruno's DNA. Emma identified Bruno from a photo array and provided his name. The Paulsons are bringing Bruno to the station in an hour for formal documentation. And we have records showing Webb owned Bruno at the time of the burglaries and got rid of him shortly after." "That's a devastatingly strong case," Dr. Marsh observed. "Circumstantial, but each piece corroborates the others. A jury will understand this." Sarah glanced over at Emma, who was now playing with building blocks, her earlier tension completely dissolved. Duke had followed her to the play area and now lay nearby, a patient guardian watching over his small charge. "We need to prepare her for what comes next," Sarah said. "If this goes to trial when it goes to trial, she might need to testify again. But this time she'll be identifying the dog, not Webb directly. That should be less traumatic." "I'll work with her," Dr. Marsh promised. "Now that she's broken through that initial fear, I think she'll be stronger. Children are remarkably resilient when they feel heard and believed. Sarah's phone rang. Lieutenant Dawson. Chen, I just got Dr. Lin's preliminary report. Tell me we have enough. We have more than enough, sir. Emma identified Bruno from a photo array and provided details only someone who was actually there could know, including the dog's name. There was a pause, then Dawson's voice came back rough with emotion. A 3-year-old kid just handed us Marcus Webb on a silver platter. Yes, sir, she did. Get me everything documented and on my desk by end of day. I'm calling Ada Rothman. We're going to bury Webb with this. As Sarah ended the call, she looked down at Duke, who had returned to her side. The German shepherd gazed up at her with those intelligent amber eyes, and she could swear she saw satisfaction in them. You knew, didn't you, boy? She murmured, scratching behind his ears. From the moment you saw Emma in that courtroom, you knew something was off. You knew there was another dog in this story. Duke's tail wagged, and he pressed his head against her leg, his way of saying they were a team always. Sarah Chen had been a detective for 15 years. She'd solved murders, broken up drug rings, taken down organized crime operations. But she'd never felt quite like this, the profound satisfaction of watching the truth emerge from the smallest, most unexpected voice. Emma Martinez had said 2 words to a police dog, "Not you, different." And those 2 words had changed everything. By Monday morning, the courthouse buzzed with an energy that was almost electric. News had leaked, as it always did, that there had been a major development in the Webb case over the weekend. Reporters clustered outside Courtroom 4B, cameras ready, speculation running wild. Inside, the gallery filled to capacity 30 minutes before proceedings were set to begin, every seat claimed by journalists, law students, and citizens who'd been following the phantom burglar trial with rapt attention. Marcus Webb sat at the defense table looking considerably less composed than he had on Friday. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed and darting nervously around the courtroom. Robert Caldwell, his public defender, leaned close to whisper something urgent, but Webb barely seemed to hear him. His attention was fixed on the prosecution table, where Ada James Rothman sat with an air of quiet confidence, organizing a stack of new exhibits that hadn't existed 3 days ago. Detective Sarah Chen entered with Duke at her side, and every head turned to watch them. The German shepherd moved with his usual professional grace, but Sarah noticed something different in the courtroom's atmosphere. People weren't just curious about the police dog anymore. They were watching him with a new understanding, as if seeing him through different eyes. Judge Patricia Morrison took the bench at precisely 9:00 a.m., her expression grave and focused. Be seated. Mr. Rothman, I understand the prosecution has requested to reopen evidence presentation. This is highly irregular given we were nearly to closing arguments. Rothman stood, his bearing confident but respectful. Your Honor, over the weekend, evidence came to light that fundamentally changes the nature of this case. Evidence that was directly prompted by testimony from young Emma Martinez on Friday afternoon. Caldwell was on his feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. The defense was given no notice of new evidence. This is a clear violation of discovery rules and Mr. Caldwell, you received my email at 6:00 a.m. this morning with complete documentation of the new evidence. Morrison cut him off sharply. That gives you 3 hours to review. While not ideal, it's sufficient given the circumstances. Your objection is noted but overruled. Mr. Rothman, proceed, but this had better be significant. It is, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Dr. Patricia Lin. The forensic analyst took the stand with scientific precision, her credentials established quickly, Ph.D. in forensic biology, 15 years with the State Crime Lab, expert testimony in over 200 cases. Rothman walked her through the weekend's discoveries with methodical care. Dr. Lin, can you explain what you analyzed this weekend? Yes. Detective Chen provided 17 evidence samples collected from the Martinez residence on Friday evening. These samples consisted primarily of animal hair, with additional samples of possible saliva and one partial paw print. Rothman displayed crime scene photos on the courtroom monitors. Where in the Martinez home were these samples collected? Multiple locations correlating with the perpetrator's known movements during the March 15th burglary. Dr. Lin used a laser pointer to indicate specific areas. The victim's bedroom closet where Emma Martinez was hiding, the master bedroom near the jewelry box that was stolen, the window point of entry, and the hallway connecting these locations. And what were your findings? Dr. Lin's testimony was clinical and devastating. All hair samples were consistent with a single-source animal, a medium to large dog with brown fur, morphologically consistent with a Labrador retriever. I extracted DNA from the hair follicles and saliva sample and conducted comparative analysis. Did you compare this DNA to any reference sample? Yes. On Saturday morning, Detective Chen brought me a buccal swab from a dog currently living with the Paulson family in Riverside. This dog was adopted from animal control on April 12th, having been picked up as a stray in Millbrook County on March 28th, 13 days after the Martinez burglary. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Jurors leaned forward. Even the reporters had stopped taking notes, too captivated to look away. Dr. Lin, what were the results of your DNA comparison? The DNA from all samples collected at the Martinez crime scene matched the DNA from the Paulson family's dog with greater than 99.9% certainty. Same animal, no doubt whatsoever. A ripple of shock moved through the gallery. Webb's face had gone pale, and Caldwell was frantically scribbling notes, his earlier confidence completely shattered. So the dog currently living with the Paulson family was definitively present at the Martinez home on March 15th during the burglary, Rothman clarified. That is correct. No further questions. Caldwell's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. Dr. Lin's science was airtight, her methodology beyond reproach. The defense attorney sat down looking defeated, and Webb slumped in his chair, his hands trembling. The prosecution calls Jennifer Paulson. The suburban mother looked nervous but determined as she took the stand. Rothman established that she'd adopted the dog from animal control in April, that he'd been in poor condition suggesting abandonment, and that they'd named him Charlie, unaware of his history. Mrs. Paulson, when you adopted Charlie, did the shelter provide any information about his previous owner? No, they said he'd been picked up as a stray, no collar or microchip, and that all legal holds had been satisfied. They didn't know where he came from. Has Charlie been a good dog for your family? Jennifer's face softened. Wonderful, gentle with my kids, well-trained, smart. Whoever had him before obviously spent time teaching him. He knows dozens of commands. Rothman displayed a photo on the monitor, Webb's original dog registration from 2 years prior. Do you recognize this dog? Jennifer studied the image. That's Charlie. Same white chest patch, same build. That's definitely him. And can you read the name listed on this registration? Bruno, owner Marcus Webb. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked 3 times before order was restored. Webb had his head in his hands, and Caldwell was conferring urgently with his client, whose whispered denials carried across the silent room. The prosecution calls Detective Sarah Chen. Sarah took the stand with Duke at her side just as she had on Friday. But this time, the testimony was entirely different. She walked the jury through Friday's revelation, Emma's reaction to Duke, her statement, "Not you, different," the decision to search for evidence of another dog. What made you believe there might be a dog connected to the burglaries? Rothman asked. Emma Martinez has exhibited a specific fear of dogs since the March 15th burglary, documented by her psychologist. When she approached Duke on Friday, she studied him with intense focus but clearly recognized he wasn't the dog from her trauma. That suggested she'd seen a specific dog during the burglary, one that had frightened her enough to create a lasting phobia. And that led you to search the Martinez home again. Yes. With the homeowner's permission, Duke and I conducted a thorough search Friday evening, specifically looking for canine evidence that might have been overlooked or dismissed as environmental contamination during the original investigation. Sarah described Duke's alerts, the locations where evidence was found, the meticulous collection and documentation. The jury watched, fascinated, as crime scene photos appeared on the monitors, each piece of evidence circled and labeled. Detective Chen, do you know what happened to Marcus Webb's dog, Bruno, after the Martinez burglary? According to county records, Bruno was registered to Mr. Webb through March of this year. After that, no renewals, no vet visits, no records whatsoever. Bruno disappeared from Webb's life approximately 2 months after the Martinez burglary, and then reappeared as a stray in Millbrook County, 40 miles away, 2 weeks later, in poor condition consistent with abandonment. Yes. Rothman paused, letting this sink in. Detective, why would someone abandon a well-trained, valuable dog in a remote location 2 months after a burglary where that dog's DNA was left at the scene? Caldwell objected, speculation. But the jury had already heard the question, and the implication was clear. The prosecution calls Dr. Rebecca Marsh. The child psychologist's testimony was the final devastating blow. She described Saturday's photo array identification, emphasizing the proper procedures used to ensure reliability. Then she dropped the bombshell that had the entire courtroom gasping. Emma not only identified the dog from a photo array containing 8 similar animals, Dr. Marsh explained. She also provided specific details about the dog's appearance, including a white chest patch visible in photos but not mentioned in any reports she could have accessed. And most significantly, she provided the dog's name unprompted. The dog's name, Rothman repeated for emphasis. Yes. Emma stated that while hiding in her closet during the burglary, she heard the perpetrator call the dog Bruno multiple times. She heard commands like Bruno, leave it, and Bruno, come. She remembered this because she was terrified the dog would bark and reveal her hiding place. The courtroom exploded. Morrison's gavel was powerless against the wave of shocked voices. Webb was shouting at Caldwell, his face red, his denials growing more desperate. Several jurors had their hands over their mouths, their expressions showing the horror of imagining a 3-year-old hiding in a closet, listening to her home being violated. When order was finally restored, Rothman had only one more question. Dr. Marsh, in your professional opinion as a child trauma specialist, is there any way Emma could have known the name Bruno without actually hearing it during the burglary? None whatsoever. The name had never been mentioned in her presence. It wasn't in news reports, wasn't discussed by her foster family, wasn't in any material she could have accessed. The only way Emma Martinez could know that dog's name is if she heard Marcus Webb say it while he was burglarizing her home. Rothman turned to face the jury, his voice ringing with conviction. Your Honor, the prosecution rests. The lunch recess was chaos. Reporters mobbed Sarah in the hallway, shouting questions she refused to answer. Webb was taken to a holding cell, his lawyer requesting an emergency conference with the judge. The jury was sequestered, forbidden from discussing the morning's revelations even amongst themselves. In a small conference room, Sarah sat with Duke, finally allowing herself to feel the enormity of what they'd accomplished. Her phone buzzed constantly, messages from Lieutenant Dawson, from tours, from colleagues across the department offering congratulations. But the message that mattered most came from Lisa Rodriguez. Emma wanted you to know she's not scared anymore. She asked if Duke could come visit sometime. She wants to thank him for being a good dog. Sarah looked down at her partner, who gazed up at her with those intelligent amber eyes. "You hear that, boy? You've got a fan." Duke's tail thumped against the floor. When court reconvened at 2:00 p.m., Robert Caldwell stood with the heaviness of a man who knew he'd lost. "Your Honor, the defense requests a recess until tomorrow morning. My client needs time to consider his options in light of the new evidence." Morrison's expression was knowing. Translation: Mr. Webb is considering a plea bargain. Caldwell didn't deny it. "Very well. We'll reconvene at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. But Mr. Caldwell, if your client doesn't make a decision by then, we're proceeding to closing arguments with the evidence as it stands. Clear?" "Crystal clear, Your Honor." As the courtroom emptied, Sarah remained seated, Duke at her feet. She thought about Emma Martinez, about how 2 words spoken by a traumatized child had unraveled an entire criminal enterprise, about how the smallest voice had spoken the loudest truth. Justice sometimes came from unexpected places, but it always came. And tomorrow, Marcus Webb would finally face the consequences of his crimes, caught not by sophisticated forensics or brilliant detective work, but by a 3-year-old girl who'd been brave enough to say, "Not you, different." Those 2 words had changed everything. The call came at 6:47 a.m., jarring Sarah Chen from a restless sleep filled with fragmented dreams of courtrooms and small voices. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand, Duke's head lifting alertly from his bed in the corner of her bedroom. "Chen," she answered, her voice rough. "It's Rothman. Webb wants to talk. He's offering a full confession in exchange for a plea deal, all 17 burglaries, complete disclosure, no trial. But he'll only talk if you're there. You and Duke." Sarah was already out of bed, reaching for her clothes. "Why me?" "He says the dog changes everything. Says he wants to set the record straight about Bruno. His lawyer thinks he's having some kind of moral crisis, but I don't care about his motivations. I care about getting those families their closure and making sure this conviction sticks. Can you be here in an hour?" 45 minutes, Sarah said, ending the call. The pre-dawn drive through empty streets gave her time to think. In her 15 years as a detective, she'd seen criminals react to inevitable conviction in various ways: rage, denial, depression, defiance. But requesting to confess specifically because of a dog, that was new. Marcus Webb had maintained his innocence through 3 days of damning testimony, through evidence that had systematically destroyed his defense. What about Bruno's revelation had broken him? The station's interrogation wing was already buzzing with activity despite the early hour. Lieutenant Dawson met her at the entrance, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one, which she accepted gratefully. "Webb's been in there since midnight with Caldwell," Dawson said, leading her down the corridor. "Apparently he couldn't sleep, kept asking to speak to his lawyer. Around 4:00 a.m., Caldwell called Rothman with the plea offer. 15 years, eligible for parole in 10, in exchange for full confession and cooperation." "That's a generous offer considering what we have on him," Sarah observed. "Rothman wants certainty. With the confession, the families get answers. We close all 17 cases definitively, and Webb has no grounds for appeal. It's clean." Dawson paused outside interview room 3. "But Sarah, be careful in there. Webb's in a strange state, emotional, volatile. Caldwell says he's been fixated on the dog, keeps talking about Bruno like he's confessing to a priest." Sarah nodded, signaling Duke to her side. The German shepherd moved into his working posture, alert, professional, ready. Together they entered the room. Marcus Webb looked like he'd aged 10 years since yesterday. His eyes were red and puffy from crying, his hands shaking as they rested on the metal table. Robert Caldwell sat beside him, looking exhausted and wary. Ada Rothman occupied the opposite side of the table with a court reporter, recording equipment already running. When Webb saw Duke, something in his face crumbled. Fresh tears spilled down his cheeks, and he made a sound between a sob and a laugh. "That's the dog," he said, his voice hoarse. "That's the dog that broke me. Not the forensics, not the witnesses, not the evidence. A dog." Sarah took her seat, Duke settling at her feet. "Mr. Webb, I understand you wanted to speak with me." Webb nodded, wiping his face with shaking hands. "I need to tell you about Bruno. Everyone needs to understand about Bruno. He was a good dog, the best dog, and his voice broke. "I left him to die in the woods because I was scared, and he didn't deserve that. None of this is his fault." Caldwell put a restraining hand on his client's arm. "Marcus, remember what we discussed. Stick to the agreement." But Webb was already talking, the words pouring out like a confession long held back. "I got Bruno 3 years ago from a shelter. He was 2 years old, already trained, just needed someone to love him. And God, I did. I loved that dog more than anything. He was my best friend, my only friend really, after my wife left and I lost my job." Sarah remained silent, letting Webb talk. This was more than a confession, it was a purging. "I started doing the burglaries about 18 months ago. I was desperate, broke, facing eviction. I'd done landscaping for a lot of these families, knew their schedules, knew which ones had valuables. I thought it would be just once or twice enough to get back on my feet." Webb laughed bitterly. "But it never is it? Just once becomes twice becomes 17 times." "And Bruno," Sarah prompted gently. "I started bringing him with me when I'd case neighborhoods. Like your detective said yesterday, a guy walking a friendly lab doesn't look suspicious. People would stop to pet Bruno, tell me about their travel plans, mention when they'd be away. He was the perfect cover." Webb's face twisted with shame. "I trained him to be quiet, to follow commands, to help me. I turned a good dog into an accomplice." Rothman leaned forward. "Mr. Webb, for the record, are you confessing to bringing Bruno with you during the commission of these burglaries?" "Yes, not all of them, but most, including," Webb's voice caught, "including the Martinez house." The room went absolutely still. "Tell us about that day," Sarah said quietly. Webb took a shuddering breath. "March 15th. I'd done landscaping for the Martinezes the previous summer, knew the grandmother worked from home, knew she took a nap most afternoons. I watched the house, waited until I saw her settle on the couch. I brought Bruno because their neighborhood had a lot of dogs. I figured he'd keep any pets calm, make me look less suspicious if anyone saw me." He paused, swallowing hard. "I went in through the bedroom window. Bruno came with me. We went through the master bedroom first. That's where people usually keep valuables. I was taking jewelry from the dresser when Bruno started acting strange. He kept looking toward the hallway, whining softly. I told him, 'Bruno, leave it,' and 'Bruno, come,' trying to keep him focused." Webb's hands clenched into fists on the table. But he wouldn't listen. He pulled away from me and went down the hall. I followed, worried he'd bark or cause a commotion. He went into a kid's bedroom and straight to the closet, started sniffing at the door. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Emma was in that closet. "I didn't know," Webb said desperately. "I swear to God, I didn't know there was a kid in the house. I thought everyone was asleep or gone. When Bruno started sniffing at that closet door, my heart stopped. I pulled him away, got out of there as fast as I could, took what I'd already grabbed and ran." "But you heard Emma," Rothman pressed. Webb nodded miserably. "I heard her breathing, fast, scared breathing, a little kid terrified in her own home because of me, because I brought a dog right to her hiding place." Tears streamed down his face. "I had nightmares about it for weeks. What if she'd made a noise and I'd panicked? What if Bruno had barked? What if I'd hurt her without meaning to?" "Yet you continued committing burglaries for another month," Rothman said, his voice hard. "I know, I'm not asking for sympathy, I need you to understand about Bruno. After that day, I couldn't look at him the same way. Every time I saw him, I thought about that little girl in the closet, about what I'd put her through. Bruno was innocent. He was just doing what I'd trained him to do, being a good dog, but I'd made him part of something terrible. Webb's voice dropped to a whisper. When your people started connecting the burglaries, when I saw police increasing patrols, I got paranoid. I realized Bruno's DNA might be at those scenes, his hair, his saliva, evidence that could link me to the crimes. And I couldn't stand the thought of Bruno being the reason I got caught. It wasn't his fault. So you abandoned him, Sarah said, unable to keep the disgust from her voice. I drove him to Millbrook County, to a wooded area near some farms. I told myself someone would find him, that a nice dog like Bruno would get picked up quick, adopted out to a good family. Webb's face crumpled. But I left him with no collar, no identification, no food or water. I let him out of the truck and drove away while he chased after me, barking. I can still hear that bark. Every night I hear it. The room was silent, except for Webb's ragged breathing and quiet sobs. Even Caldwell looked disturbed by his client's confession. For the record, Rothman said, his voice carefully controlled, you are confessing to 17 counts of burglary, possession of stolen property, and animal cruelty in the abandonment of Bruno. Yes, Webb whispered. All of it, every single one. I'll give you dates, addresses, everything I took, where I sold it. Complete cooperation, he looked at Sarah with desperate, pleading eyes. Tell me he's okay. Tell me Bruno found a good home. Sarah thought about Jennifer Paulson's testimony, about the children playing in the backyard with a happy, healthy lab, about how Bruno, now Charlie, had been given a second chance at the life he deserved. He's with a family in Riverside, Sarah said. 2 kids who adore him, a yard to play in, people who love him and take good care of him. He's happy. Webb's face twisted with an emotion Sarah couldn't quite name, relief mixed with grief mixed with profound regret. Good. That's good. He deserves that. He always deserved better than me. Mr. Webb, Rothman said formally, do you understand that by making this confession, you are pleading guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentence of 15 years imprisonment, eligible for parole in 10 years? I understand. And you're making this confession freely, without coercion, in the presence of your attorney? Yes. Then let's begin with the full details. Start with the first burglary, September of last year. For the next 3 hours, Marcus Webb methodically confessed to every crime. He provided addresses, dates, descriptions of stolen items, names of pawn shops and fences where he'd sold the goods. He drew maps showing his entry and exit points. He answered every question with exhaustive detail, his voice flat and emotionless, as if he'd used up all his feeling on his confession about Bruno. Sarah sat through it all, Duke at her feet, bearing witness to the unraveling of a man who'd made terrible choices and destroyed multiple lives, including his own. She thought about the 17 families who'd had their homes violated, their sense of security stolen. About Emma Martinez, who'd hidden in a closet while a stranger's dog sniffed at her door. But she also thought about Bruno, an innocent animal who'd been trained to help commit crimes, then abandoned in the woods when he became a liability, and about how that same dog had ultimately been the key to bringing his owner to justice. When the confession finally ended, Webb looked hollowed out, empty. Caldwell gathered his papers, preparing to escort his client back to holding. Detective Chen, Webb said as they stood to leave, that little girl Emma, will she be okay? Sarah met his eyes steadily. Emma Martinez is 3 years old and she spent 7 months having nightmares because of what you did. But she was brave enough to tell the truth, brave enough to identify Bruno and give us the evidence we needed to stop you from hurting anyone else. So yes, Mr. Webb, I think Emma will be okay. She's stronger than you ever gave her credit for. Webb nodded slowly, accepting this. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her Bruno never wanted to hurt her. He was just a good dog with a bad owner. I'll tell her, Sarah said, though she suspected Emma would never want to hear anything from Marcus Webb again. As guards led Webb away, Rothman stood and stretched, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. Well, that's that. 17 cases closed, full restitution negotiated, and we never have to go back into that courtroom. The families will want to know, Sarah said. Press conference at noon. You should be there. You broke this case. Sarah shook her head. Emma broke this case. She's the one who deserves the credit. Dawson, who'd been observing through the one-way glass, entered the room. Chen's right. That little girl took down a serial burglar by saying 2 words to a police dog. That's the story people need to hear. As they filed out of the interrogation wing, Sarah felt Duke press against her leg, his way of checking in, making sure she was okay after the intense session. She rested her hand on his head, drawing comfort from his solid, steady presence. "You know what the worst part is," she said to no one in particular. Webb genuinely loved that dog. You could hear it in his voice. But he loved himself more, loved his freedom more. So when it came down to it, Bruno was just another thing he could throw away to save himself. "Some people don't deserve dogs," Rothman observed. "Most people don't deserve dogs," Sarah corrected. "But some of us are lucky enough to have them anyway." She looked down at Duke, who gazed back with absolute trust and loyalty. Everything Bruno had given Marcus Webb, everything Webb had betrayed. Justice had been served. Marcus Webb would spend the next decade behind bars. The 17 families would get their closure, their stolen items returned or compensated for. And Bruno, now Charlie, would live out his days in a home with people who would never ask him to be anything but the good dog he'd always been. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the system actually worked. Sometimes the bad guys got caught and the innocent got their happy endings. And sometimes justice spoke through the smallest voices, saying the simplest words that changed everything. Not you, different. Those 2 words had brought down a criminal. And saved a dog's life in the process. 3 months later, the autumn sun cast golden light through the windows of the Martinez home, painting everything in warm, gentle hues. Sarah Chen stood on the front porch of the yellow house with the red door, Duke sitting calmly beside her, a wrapped package tucked under her arm. She could hear laughter from inside, real, unguarded laughter that made her smile before she even knocked. Rosa Martinez opened the door, her face breaking into a wide grin when she saw them. "Detective Chen and Duke, please come in, come in. Emma has been asking about you every day this week." The interior of the home looked different than Sarah's last visit, brighter somehow, despite being the same furniture and walls. The heaviness that had permeated the space, the weight of violation and fear, had lifted. Family photos still covered the walls, but now there were new ones. Emma smiling at a park, Emma blowing out birthday candles, Emma holding a certificate from her preschool. "Emma," Rosa called toward the back of the house, "your special visitors are here." The sound of running feet preceded Emma's appearance. The little girl had grown in 3 months. She seemed taller, her face fuller, her eyes brighter. She wore jeans and a t-shirt with a cartoon dog on it, her hair in the same 2 neat braids Sarah remembered. But everything else about her was different. The haunted look was gone, replaced by the natural curiosity and energy of a healthy 4-year-old. Emma stopped short when she saw Duke, but not with fear, with pure delight. "Duke," she squealed, dropping to her knees and opening her arms. The German shepherd looked up at Sarah, who gave him the release signal. Duke walked forward and allowed Emma to throw her arms around his neck, his tail wagging steadily as she hugged him tight. "I missed you so much," Emma said into Duke's fur. "I told all my friends about you. I told them you're a hero dog who catches bad guys and keeps people safe." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. This was why she'd asked Lieutenant Dawson for permission to make this visit on her day off, why she'd driven across town with a nervous flutter in her stomach. She'd needed to see this, needed to witness Emma's healing with her own eyes. "Emma has been doing so much better," Rosa said softly, standing beside Sarah. "The nightmare stopped about a month ago. She's back in preschool making friends, playing like a normal child. Dr. Marsh says she's shown remarkable resilience. Children often do, Sarah replied, especially when they have people who believe them and support them. Lisa Rodriguez emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of lemonade and cookies. The social worker's face lit up when she saw Sarah and Duke. "You came. Emma's been counting down the days." They settled in the living room, Sarah and Lisa on the couch, Rosa in her armchair, and Emma on the floor with Duke, who lay with patient tolerance as the child showed him her stuffed animals one by one, explaining each toy's name and personality with the serious attention children gave to such matters. "We wanted to give you this," Sarah said, handing Rosa the wrapped package. "It's from the department, from everyone who worked on the case." Rosa unwrapped it carefully, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a framed certificate of appreciation, signed by Lieutenant Dawson, the chief of police, and even the mayor. It read, "In recognition of Emma Martinez, whose courage and truthfulness helped bring a dangerous criminal to justice and made our community safer, with gratitude and admiration." Below the certificate in the same frame was a photograph, the one taken by court staff that had gone quietly viral among law enforcement circles. Emma, small and brave, reaching out to touch Duke's head for the first time. The image had become symbolic within the department. Innocence and justice meeting, fear being overcome, truth being spoken. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "This is beautiful. Emma will treasure this forever." "She should be proud," Sarah said. "What she did was extraordinary. Most adults wouldn't have had her courage." "She talks about it now," Lisa added. "For a long time she couldn't, but now she tells people she helped catch the bad man. Dr. Marsh says that's healthy. It gives her a sense of agency, of having power in her own story rather than just being a victim." Emma looked up from her play with Duke. "I wasn't scared in court," she announced proudly. "Well, maybe a little bit, but Duke was there, so I was brave." "You were very brave," Sarah confirmed. "The bravest person in that whole courtroom." "And I helped, right? I helped catch the bad man." "You absolutely did. We couldn't have done it without you." Emma beamed, then returned her attention to Duke, now attempting to put a doll's hat on his head. The German shepherd endured this with the patience of a saint, earning him a cookie slipped from Emma's stash when she thought no one was looking. "What happened to Bruno?" Emma asked suddenly, her voice casual but her body language showing she'd been working up to this question. "Is he okay?" Sarah had discussed with Dr. Marsh how to handle this topic if it came up. The psychologist had advised honesty appropriate to Emma's age and emotional state. "Bruno is very okay," Sarah said gently. "He lives with a nice family now, a mom and dad and 2 kids who love him very much. They call him Charlie now, and he has a big backyard to play in and gets lots of treats and belly rubs." Emma considered this seriously. "That's good. Bruno was a good dog. It wasn't his fault the bad man was bad." The wisdom in that simple statement made all 3 adults pause. Emma, at 4 years old, understood something many adults struggled with, that Bruno had been as much a victim of Marcus Webb's choices as anyone else. "You're exactly right," Sarah said. "Bruno was always a good dog. He just had an owner who made very bad choices." "Like Duke is a good dog with a good owner," Emma added, looking at Sarah with those enormous brown eyes. "You're good. You catch bad people. Duke helps you. That's what good people do." Sarah had to look away for a moment, blinking hard. Out of the mouths of babes, as the saying went. Rosa cleared her throat, changing the subject to something lighter. "Emma, why don't you show Detective Chen the picture you drew for Duke?" Emma jumped up and ran to her room, returning moments later with a piece of construction paper covered in crayon drawings. She presented it to Sarah with ceremony. The drawing showed 2 stick figures, one large, one small, standing next to a brown dog and a black and tan dog. Above them, in Rosa's careful handwriting, Emma was still learning her letters, were the words, Thank you, Duke and Detective Chen. Love, Emma. This is beautiful, Sarah said, genuinely moved. Can I keep it? Emma nodded enthusiastically. It's for you. I drew Duke really good, see, with his pointy ears and his tail. You drew him perfectly. I'm going to put this up in my office so I can see it every day. They spent the next hour in comfortable conversation. Rosa talked about Emma's progress in preschool, how she was excelling at art and loved story time. Lisa shared updates on the legal aftermath. Webb's plea deal had been finalized. He was serving his 15-year sentence at a state facility, and restitution payments were beginning to reach the affected families. The Hendersons got their grandmother's wedding ring back, Lisa said. The Johnsons recovered about 60% of what was stolen. It's not everything, but it's something. What about your family? Sarah asked Rosa. We received compensation for what couldn't be recovered, Rosa replied. We used it to install a proper security system and fix some things around the house that needed attention. But honestly, the best thing we got back wasn't money or jewelry. It was Emma's sense of safety. That's priceless. As the afternoon wore on and Sarah prepared to leave, Emma suddenly grew quiet. She approached Sarah and Duke, her small face serious. But mostly she thought about Emma Martinez, who'd said 2 words, "Not you, different," and changed everything. Those 2 words had solved a case, had caught a criminal, had saved a dog's life, had shown the world that truth could come from the smallest voices if only people were willing to listen. Back at the station, Sarah pinned Emma's drawing to her office wall, right next to her commendations and certificates. The crayon stick figures smiled out at her, a child's interpretation of justice, friendship, and courage. Lieutenant Dawson passed by, pausing to look at the drawing. That from the Martinez kid. Emma, yes, she's doing great. Healing, thriving, back to being a regular 4-year-old. Dawson nodded approvingly. Good. That's the part they don't show on the crime dramas, the after, the healing. The kids who get their childhoods back because someone stopped the bad guy. That's the part that matters most, Sarah agreed. As Dawson walked away, Sarah sat at her desk with Duke at her feet, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows. She pulled up the case file, now officially closed, and typed her final entry. Case 2020-47841 through 2020-47857, closed by confession and plea agreement. Offender serving 15-year sentence. All victims notified. Restitution in progress. Special commendation recommended for civilian witness Emma Martinez, age 4, whose testimony and identification proved crucial to successful resolution. Animal involved in commission of crimes has been recovered and placed in appropriate home. No further action required. She paused, then added one more line. Sometimes justice speaks in the smallest voices. Today we listened. Sarah closed the file, her work complete. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythm. People going home to families, to safety, to the ordinary beautiful moments that made up a life free from fear. And in a yellow house with a red door, a little girl played with her toys, slept through the night without nightmares, and knew that when she'd needed help, people had come. That when she'd spoken her truth, people had believed her. That in the end, justice had prevailed. Because a 3-year-old had touched a police dog and said 2 words that changed everything. Not you, different. Those 2 words had echoed through a courtroom, through a criminal investigation, through the hearts of everyone who'd heard them. And they would echo for years to come, a reminder that truth, courage, and justice could come from anywhere. Even from the smallest hands reaching out to touch a good dog's head. The end.